Hi, and welcome to the Royal Chronicles. I'm Hannah, and I'm back here with Luke.
Hello.
And we are thrilled to be back. It's been a little while, but today's going to be fun because we've been talking about this for a while. This is going to be part one of a 3-part series that we're going to be doing on firsts. So it's the first of firsts.
Yeah, it's sort of a new format we're trying.
Well, why don't you explain it, Luke? This was your idea anyway.
Okay. So we're each going to pick, in this series, we'll each pick a first of some kind, like either the first member of a dynasty or the first ruler of any kind in a country, something like that. And we'll both present one in each episode.
Right. And I think it's sort of an idea of mine to experiment with shorter length content. So that's why we're splitting it up into 3 parts, because we tend to just prattle on and it can go for an hour. Not everyone has time to listen to that. So anyway, but before we get into it, of course, thank you for listening. I noticed even though we haven't posted in a while, we have a couple of new subscribers, so appreciate that. Yes, welcome. Glad you're here. We really hope you enjoy this. We certainly have a lot of fun doing it. It's, as I've said on many occasions, this is something we do for fun. It's something we enjoy talking about. So we figured, why not just press record while we're doing it? But in any case, if you're not already following us, you can keep up with us on TikTok, Instagram, Facebook, X, formerly Twitter, and well, of course, predominantly YouTube, but we're also on Spotify and Amazon Music. But having said all of that, Luke, why don't you get started? Who is your first?
Okay, so the one that I'm going to start out with is the first, debatably, I'm going to qualify that, but first Pharaoh of Egypt.
See, I'm glad you said debatably, because mine is in the same category. Was he real? Was he not? Anyway.
I mean, anytime it's something ancient, it's always debatable, and there's always like different fashions in the academic and, Egyptological community about, what they think the real origins of Egypt were and everything. But I'm picking this one because it's the most fun and it seems to have like an actual story to it.
Okay. Well, I am probably like most people. My knowledge of the pharaohs is very limited. I remember reading about it in school as a child, but what I mostly know of is the biblical story of Moses and the Israelites and that whole saga, which was supposed to be who? Ramses? And isn't that kind of debated too?
It is. The name of
we don't
the
even know
Pharaoh
that.
isn't mentioned in any of the Hebrew texts. And then people have sort of guessed who they thought it would be later on. So, and nobody really knows.
Yeah. But point is, that's really the only one that, of course, everyone has heard of Cleopatra, I think.
Yeah.
And King Tut, but, or whatever he was actually called in his language. But okay. Anyway, continue.
Okay. So the one that I'm picking is the first known Pharaoh of Egypt. His name is Narmer, and he is the Pharaoh who, at least based on the documents that we found mainly on friezes and written on items that were sold outside of Egypt, that he was the king of Upper Egypt and that he claimed to have conquered Lower Egypt. So he's from the southern kingdom, because to the Egyptians, up is south because that's where the Nile comes from, and down is north because that's where the Nile's going.
Isn't that interesting?
Yeah.
I never thought about that before. Wow. Okay.
Yeah. So, one of the most well-known documents that we have about him is actually a palette that would have been used in temple rituals for mixing makeup. It's a random item, but it was found intact, and it has several friezes on it and some hieroglyphs that depict his conquest.
What is a frieze?
So it's a like a 3-dimensional carving in stone.
Okay.
To where it's not into the stone like an engraving, but it's
raised.
The stone has been, it's raised up out
Interesting.
Of the stone.
Okay, that's cool. All right.
Anyway, I'm not the best with art history.
Oh, me neither.
But so like I said, it depicts him as the king of Upper Egypt, and it shows him in his conquest of Lower Egypt. So it has like all of the traditional pharaonic iconography that we see throughout the whole history of Egypt. This is one of the earliest places where we see it, and it's attached to him. So we see the crown, which in this depiction we see in two halves. On one side of the palette, it shows him wearing the crown of Upper Egypt, which would be his native land. And then on the other side, which seems to depict him marching into his conquered lands, he's wearing the crown of Lower Egypt. So saying that he's now the king of this place.
Is it true that his father was named King Scorpion II?
Yes, or at least we think it's possible.
So there was a quote unquote monarchy before there was a pharaoh. They were just called something else. Is that the legend?
Well, so it would be that he was already pharaoh, but he was pharaoh of Upper Egypt.
Okay.
And that there would have been a pharaoh of Lower Egypt, and the Upper Egyptians conquered them and made it all one. So they became the only pharaoh.
Okay,
if you had an area with multiple kings and one of them conquered all the others, he'd just be the only king.
So back when there was a king of England and a king of Scotland.
Yeah, like that.
But then now it's the same person.
Now it's just the same person.
Okay.
Yeah.
All right. Cool.
Yeah. So, like you said, King Scorpion, he's one that shows
That's
up in
really
the records.
cool name. You don't mess with a dude named Scorpion.
So that also connects somewhat back to stories that may have been influenced by this conquest, if it was a conquest. Like I said, it's debated, but I'm going with there was because it's a more fun story. Is that this was later reflected in Egyptian theological texts, because they all depict a struggle between two different factions in the gods, similar to if there had been two different major factions in Egypt. And they are represented by Horus, who, even in the earliest depictions we have, Narmer and his brand of pharaonic rule always identify with Horus. And then he was put in contrast to his opponent, which is Set, and they tend to sort of associate Set with anything that's chaotic or sort of outside of the norms of Egypt. So lots of times, enemies and things could be sort of identified with Set, because he represents chaos and Horus represents order. And the pharaohs were always depicting themselves as the bringers of order.
Of course. Well, and most leaders of that variety.
Yeah.
Right. Gotcha.
Pretty much. Unless you're Genghis Khan. But that's a whole nother story.
That can be another time.
I'm sure
place.
he did claim to bring order and stuff, but only for his people. Anyway, moving on. So I picked him partly because Egypt is so very interesting. Partly because it's just so very recognizable, and it's so connected to multiple cultures' ways of thinking about the past. It's just sort of iconic in the West. For if you think about ancient history, you tend to think of Egypt in the visual. Lots of people know that Mesopotamia is older, but you tend to imagine Egypt just because it's so recognizable.
Right. What we know of Egypt, the images we see are their ancient buildings and structures.
And like I was saying before, one of the remarkable things about their culture is how it stayed so constant. The images you have surrounding Narmer in all of the documents we have with him are the same images being used when the Ptolemies take over, and finally when Cleopatra is the last queen.
And correct me if I'm wrong, just for a point of reference, it's thought that this person, Narmer, became pharaoh roughly around 3150 BC.
Yes.
And for contrast, Cleopatra, of whom you spoke, she died in 30 BC. So think about what a massive span of time that is.
Yeah, we're getting into the part about Egypt that some people know, but has always stood out to me, that Cleopatra and the end of the pharaonic period are still closer to our current time period than they were to the beginnings of Egyptian history.
That's mind-boggling, because think of the changes that have occurred, since the reign of Cleopatra. Was it
Exactly.
the seventh? Was that the last one?
Yes.
Cleopatra the seventh, to now.
Yeah,
And how different the world looks.
mind-boggling.
Yeah.
And just how much, like I said, sort of constancy there is in the Egyptian culture. It's
Mhm.
like the art style stays the same through almost the entire, like you were saying, it's
Mhm.
over 3,000 years.
These are some of the things that just I find riveting about this particular topic. When we talk about monarchies, royalty, generally speaking, that implies that we're speaking about very old families, traditions, cultures, generally speaking. A lot older than our country. Most everyone is older than our country, to be fair. But it's just, yeah, okay. But it's amazing. It really is. And I don't know that we give it, we think about it enough. Because if you really consider what you just said about the amount of time between her and us and so forth, it really makes you
think about the scale of time.
Yeah, and your place in the world and history as it, and the story of the world as it marches on. It's amazing.
Yeah, and so my sort of thesis for picking Narmer was just sort of, since the theme is firsts, I picked him because since he's the first pharaoh we really have like images of, and we have his name, and we're all of that. I picked him because he's sort of a very visible template that far back in time that the Egyptian pharaohs will follow all the way through their rule. So a very strong sort of archetype that they all wanted to follow.
Got it.
So that's why I picked him.
Well, I think it was a good choice.
Who did you pick?
Okay, so this one is not nearly as deep. I picked, again, it's disputed. Some people question whether or not he was a real person. Rurik.
Oh, okay.
Of modern day Russia. And I think I mentioned before, I am fascinated with all things Russian history, culture, language, etc. That's kind of I don't know. I just thought to myself, I don't know who the first person supposedly was. I have a decent amount of knowledge about the later czars. We did an episode. If you haven't listened to our episode on the last czar, Nicholas II. But in any case, this person supposedly lived around the year, let's see. They think he reigned, quote unquote, somewhere between 860 something until his supposed death in 879. So not nearly as ancient as what you were just discussing, but a long time ago. Let's give it that. So the country that we now think about, Russia, has existed for a very, very, very long time. Not in the way that it's currently constituted, but there have been tribes and people groups of a variety of them for a really long time. So this particular person, Rurik, was thought to have been a chieftain of the Rus, who...
Swedish Vikings.
Right. Didn't know that, did you? Vikings in Russia. Anyways. He was invited, quote unquote, to come to Novgorod, which there's more than one place with that name. I know of Nizhny Novgorod, but I think this is a different one. Anyway, in 862. And there's been a lot of discussion as to whether or not, like I said, he was a real person or not. There are people that say that he was a myth. There are people that firmly believe that he was real. But there's not a lot of hard evidence, kind of like, yours. But anyway,
I mean, there's lots of reasons for that. He was ruling in a non-literate society in a time period with a whole lot of change, and many of the people groups in the area were either new or they were being moved around. There was a lot of migration in this time period.
Yeah.
And he himself is part of that, being at least people believe he and his followers would have originally been from Sweden. They represent a sort of almost colonial effort of people coming out of Scandinavia and going down the rivers into Central Europe.
Mm-hmm.
And at least according to their story, the people around were just so impressed with them that they asked them to become their rulers.
Well, that's a good lead in, because I'm not really clear as to why this occurred. But again, if it's just a myth, then I understand if someone just made the story up. But if true, interesting. I don't know how to pronounce this. The Varyag or something. It's like a tribe of some sort.
Mm-hmm.
They called upon Rurik and I guess his brothers that he had. They were summoned. And according to an ancient writing on the topic, it is said that and these were Slavic people.
Yeah.
They said, quote, because this is written in something called the Primary Chronicle.
Mm-hmm.
Our land is great and rich, but there is no order in it. Of course. Come to rule and reign over us. It's like, come on, be our leader. So, the story goes that he arrives in Novgorod, becomes the ruler, and I guess along with his brothers. And that's just how it came to be. Now, I don't know if he was a real person. I find that unusual that there wasn't some kind of battle or something.
Or just that people asked an outsider who speaks a different language and probably practices a different religion. Yeah, we want you to come and be our king.
Do you remember the episode we did about the King of the Belgians?
Yes.
Wasn't that kind of his story?
Kind of.
If you think about it. So I guess there's precedent.
There is precedent, but it's very modern for those kind of things.
But it can happen.
It can happen, yeah.
But I remember reading that story and thinking, what on earth? If you want to know what I'm talking about,
grab the German guy.
We have an older episode, King of the Belgians. Check it out. He was neither Belgian nor he wasn't from that country.
And he wasn't he had nothing, king originally.
Yeah, that's what I was trying to brain freeze. Anyways, yeah. So he wasn't really a royal to begin with. Not, like that.
Like
and he wasn't Belgian.
A royal.
Yeah. Crazy. Okay. So there are people who subscribe to something called the Norman theory, and they say that Rurik was a real person. He was a chieftain who basically laid the foundation for the future of what would be the Russian state as we understand it. But I think there's a couple, I don't want to get into there. I've read a lot of stuff. I'm trying to parse through what makes sense for what we're doing right now. But there's a lot of writings about it. There is a website that I found particularly interesting. It's called Russia Beyond, I think. But if you Google Rurik, there's all kinds of things. And you just have to understand that it's people don't agree on it, so you're going to hear different takes and whatever.
Yeah, and of course, there's all sorts of, like I was saying, even the debates, some of them are slightly overcomplicated because the time period we're talking about, there wasn't a place called Russia. There wasn't a place called Ukraine. Right. None of these places had official identities yet. And these people weren't thinking, oh, I'm now the founder of the great, the Russian people or whatever. They were just ruling the region that they were in. One of the reasons why they're used as founders or founding myths for these different states is because they were a successful ruling dynasty in this region. And it carried on, and people who are descended from them eventually became the rulers of the states that now exist.
Well, it's interesting. I don't know that this is, and see, maybe it's just that I don't have the proper understanding here, but the people that support the idea that he was real, their evidence, as best I can tell, is that the lands in this part of what we know as Russia, Novgorod, and other places that I can't pronounce, I'm sorry, we know that they were under the influence of Scandinavian tribes, as you said, and they traded with them, and that very early Russian names, such as Oleg, Igor, and other that I'm not going to try to say, have Scandinavian roots.
Yeah.
And that the word Rus, which evolved into
Rowers.
Russians, was the name of the family that Rurik supposedly belonged to.
And it's believed that its original Scandinavian roots mean the rowers, like the people who drive the ships.
Right. Well, so I don't know. I don't think I'm going to spend time getting into why people think he's not a real person. I like to think he
It
was.
gets very political.
I know. And isn't that crazy? There have been so many of these stories that I've looked into. Just I'm like, oh, I have no idea about this person or that person. And then you get into the kind of the academic discussions, and you can tell everyone has some kind of agenda. Everybody's motivated by their own, I don't know, not worldview, but I guess politics.
Yeah, it all becomes about identity politics and
Yeah.
like, oh, we want to claim this person, or oh, that person didn't exist because I don't like the people who like this story. It's all like that. But if this person existed, he would have been interesting because, like we said, he's got a Scandinavian background, but he's ruling in a Slavic or majority Slavic region. And one thing that's interesting about him and at least his people group is, like I was saying, with their migration into Central Europe, they were using the river systems. And it's not known exactly what their goal was, but we do know that they found out they could go from the North Sea, the Baltic, not the North Sea, and make their way all the way down to the Mediterranean. This became a very valuable trade route for them. So they're moving through these Slavic lands and they're transporting valuables and building up what it's believed to be sort of like way stations or trading posts along the rivers where they would do ship changes. And this would likely make them very influential in this region where they're foreigners, but they're bringing in all of this stuff and they can, buy furs from you and give you something that you're looking for. So it would make them influential players in the area.
That's interesting.
So that could be another reason why they might have more willingly chosen him as a leader, because of this sort of international network that he could be connected to.
Well, I do know that it said he had two younger brothers who kind of took control of two different areas. Again, I'm not going to butcher the names. I'm sorry. But upon their death, not long after these territories kind of were established and came to be, Rurik is said to have consolidated his authority in all of these areas, which I guess if you think about it, that makes sense. You take this area and that area, you put them together, you keep growing and growing and growing, and now you have Russia, which is the largest country in the world.
Yeah, and I mean, if you've already got the three brothers and they all have followings in the same sort of area, and two of them die, the third one could kind of pretty easily take up their patronage network.
There's also a story that two of the friends or associates, let's say, of Rurik were sent to Constantinople, now known as Istanbul, seized Kiev before attacking, for launching an attack or something like that. Like there were things going on, which kind of, if there's all of these detailed other stories, I don't know why people are questioning why this main guy really existed. I clearly don't have enough information, but anyways, so as I said, he settled Novgorod, which I'm just reading my notes, means new town. I didn't know that. Okay. See, you should be doing this. You know more than I do.
I only know a little.
You always say that. It's not
and then,
true.
Like you mentioned just a second ago, he was the ruler of Novgorod, but then they also launched an attack and conquered Kiev. Or Kiev. I hear different pronunciations. I'm not exactly sure which one's right.
Kiev. I'm not sure.
Anyway, so this is how you're sort of binding these two different identities that exist now together with the same character. He's the ruler of both because they weren't separate yet. So it's not Russia and Ukraine. It's just one region with a bunch of tribes. And he's one of the most powerful leaders in the area.
Yeah. Well, so Rurik supposedly stayed in power until he passed away sometime in the 870s. And the lore, as our youngest brother would say, the lore is that Rurik bequeathed his holdings, his realm, to Oleg, who was part of his family. I don't know how closely related they were. Oleg moved the capital to Kiev.
I'm not certain that this is right, but I think that's his grandson.
Okay, we'll go with that.
But I'm not certain
clearly didn't
about
think
that.
it was important enough to
I
write
haven't
it down.
checked that family tree in a while.
It all seems to be so up in the air. Anyway, Oleg moved the capital to Kiev, apparently by unaliving the rulers of the city at the time.
As you do. Back then.
And founded the state of Kievan Rus, ruled by Rurik's successors. And that state went on until the Mongols arrived sometime in the 1200s.
And
so this is still
the burning of Kiev.
And there's all kinds of nonsense going on over there right now. Imagine, same area. It just never stops, does it? Anyways.
Well, there was a long period of there where...
Yeah, it's true. It's just, it's funny how history, if not exactly repeats itself,
Chaos shows up all over the place. It's part of life.
So there's something called the Hypatian Codex? Hypatian. Hypatian. Anyway, Rurik is not listed in the regional list, but it starts with Deer and Askald. Again, I'm sorry. Followed by Oleg and then Igor and so on. But Rurik is not listed, which I suppose is why people wonder if he really existed or not. But anyway.
Once again, pre-literate society. Not a lot of writing back then to say, this is my land, or I'm the king here, this is the lie I just wrote.
Oh my goodness. Anyways. There are alternative theories, but in the interest of time, I'll just recommend that you all check it out for yourselves. This is just meant to be kind of a quick little, this is supposed to be the first person here, this is the first person there, and we just kind of hit the highlights.
Oh, and for reference, at least based on what they seem to have believed, Ivan the Terrible would have been his final direct ruling descendant.
Isn't that interesting? Are you talking about the czardom that went until like the 1500s? Yeah.
At least that's what that family believed.
Which
they were the Rurik dynasty,
of course, until the revolution and all that hideousness.
Yes. But their claim was that they were a direct line, like they hadn't switched or married into any other families or not had sons. It was all one straight family line until Ivan the Terrible, who killed his own son and unalived his own family line, and that's how the Romanovs became the czars.
Yeah, well, I guess it's possible. It is possible, but.
Yeah. It's possible.
Maybe a little unlikely, but sure. Yeah, we'll go with that. Anyways, that's what I have today. I feel like it wasn't as detailed as yours, but like I said.
But you did two countries. You did Russia and Ukraine.
Well, what we currently think of in the modern world is Russia and Ukraine. Yeah. So I think the next one. Oh, should I say the next one I'm going to be doing?
Sure. Could do previews.
Okay. So the preview is, and this is of interest to me because I have a legal background, is I'm going to be exploring briefly Hammurabi.
Okay.
Some of you may have heard of Hammurabi's Code. It's considered to be pretty much the first legal set of laws, legal system, kind of a rough way of putting it, but that's what I'm going to be doing. What is your next?
My next one is going to be sort of different because he's not the first ruler, but he is Alexander the Great, who is historically the first one given the title the Great.
And as we discussed off mic at another time, I said, did he give himself the title the Great? You said no.
No.
You said, but everyone else that has the Great basically called themselves that. So bequeathed themselves the title of the Great.
Yeah, once you get into like 16th century and onward, people were just calling themselves the Great all over the
I
place.
think bequeath was the wrong word. You know what I mean? Anyways.
Bestowed.
Bequeath implies that someone passed away, correct?
Or, gave to.
I swear I can speak English. I really can.
But yeah, I'm going with Alexander the Great as someone who's not the first ruler or the first in his country, but the first one to get the great title.
Mm-hmm. I like it. I'll be interested in that. Because I know I read about it, when I was younger, but it's been a long time.
Oh, it's very fun.
I know. You love all that stuff. It's great. Okay, well, I think that's it for us today because as I said, this is going to be a shorter episode and our series on first we're going to try to keep it a little shorter. But do you have anything else?
I think that's everything for today.
Okay, wonderful. Well, that was great. I don't know what to do with myself. Normally we're here for like a long time. Anyways, thank you so much for listening to this. We hope you enjoy it. Please let us know what you think. Leave a comment, questions. If we completely misstated, or not Luke, if I completely misstated what I said, correct me, set me straight. I want to know. And also, I don't think I've said this in a while. Don't be shy. If you guys have suggestions, there's things you want to hear about, or maybe about, and would like to enlighten us, we love suggestions. We've done a couple of episodes based on people's suggestions, and it was great. So
yeah, I mean, individuals, whole families, or just like a topic that has to do with the history of monarchies and royalty.
Because there are a lot of YouTube channels and podcasts that I really enjoy listening to, but a lot of them tend to stick to the kind of the ones the big names, the big dynasties, which are great and it's very interesting. But we're wanting to explore the lesser known things, the more obscure. So if you have anything like that, let us know. But in the meantime, like, share, subscribe, all the good things, follow us, all that kind of stuff. But as usual, thank you for your time. We really appreciate it. There's a lot of stuff out there that you can spend your time listening to, consuming, and if you choose to spend even a little bit of time with us, we appreciate it. But until next time, which hopefully will be less
very
than
soon. We
a
hope
month
it will
from
be soon.
now, we'll see you next time.
Bye.